Welcome everyone to our latest Reef Chat, and thank you for again joining us as we explore the wonders of our glorious Great Barrier Reef and what we're all doing to save this irreplaceable ecosystem and its marine life for future generations. In this Reef Chat, we're going to focus on a part of the reef that we can never underestimate the impact, and that's the reef's many things. It's an amazing icon. It's a place that people want to visit, and it remains on everyone's bucket list, but it's also a home, and we need to make sure that the thousands of species that call the reef home are able to continue to do that for future generations. So today we're going to focus on the power that our reef has as home and what we're doing to help protect some of these critical homes. Specifically, up and down the Great Barrier Reef, there is a network of reef islands, and these provide places for wildlife to rest, to feed, to shelter and breed. This includes turtles, whales, manta rays, dolphins, just to name a few. And unfortunately, some of these islands are facing the growing combination of threats, with the biggest being climate change, and they need to be restored and protected. Also, some of these islands we like to think are sort of super-powered, high-performing islands with what they bring to biodiversity. So we must make sure they're in fighting fit form as we go through the next few decades, so they can carry, I guess, the load of some of the biodiversity for the Great Barrier Reef. And that's why a couple of years ago, the Foundation pioneered the largest reef habitat restoration program of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere, the Reef Islands Initiative. And Lady Elliot Island, which is a special place to our heart and to many people who'd be tuning in right now, was the very first island included in this initiative. And we're really proud to have two very special, passionate panelists and rock stars in their own regard, who are here to chat about how we're restoring this critical habitat, or should I say, how they're restoring this critical habitat to protect ecosystems and save vulnerable species. So a very special welcome to our two panelists, Peter Gash, who is an eco-champion, just Google him, custodian of the Lady Elliot Island, and a very worthy recent recipient of an Order of Australia medal, and Dr. Kathy Townsend, who is from the University of Sunshine Coast Marine Biology, and she's a lead researcher of the Leaf to Reef, which is the best name, biodiversity of Lady Elliot Island project. And she has, I would say, look, I used to always think that Peter had the coolest job, but increasingly the more I've been Googling about Kathy, I think she may have one of the coolest jobs on the planet as well. So welcome both. And I know that we've had some great success around these reef chats and sharing a deeper side of what's going on with the Great Barrier Reef, but also shining a light on reef champions to people around the world. I know this is going to be a very special treatment because LEI is unique in so many ways. And in some ways, it's a leadership ecosystem of what we can do, of this, the symbol of what intervention, local actions, spirit, heart can do and working together. And there's nothing more than I will say to everybody is you'll finish this reef chat feeling so hopeful for the future. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of a history question, because anybody who Googles Lady Elliot will look at glorious pictures of paradise and have these great experiences, but it wasn't always that way. Today it's an award-winning award-winning resort and ecosystem, but in fact, it was a guano mine until the 1970s. And if you go onto the Lady Elliot Island Resort, you'll see photos which they're shocking. So Peter, throwing over to you first, can you explain, a little bit about what guano mining is, but, what have you witnessed happen to the island over the time that you've called it part of your home, really?
Well, Anna, you know me. It'll never be a short answer, but I'll do my best to.
So Kathy and I we're gonna interrupt when we can.
Yeah, that's it. You make sure you keep on me there. So
yeah.
Let's start with what is Lady Elliot Island. It's really unique because it's a coral cay. And a coral cay is very different to a beautiful island like the Whitsundays, Hamilton Island, Daydream Island, Hayman Island. They're continental islands. They're rock islands. Lovely in their own right, and they'll have fringing reefs around them. But Lady Elliot and its near neighbours here on the southern end of the reef and Rain Island, they're very special because they're coral cays and they're created by nature. They're created by the wildlife that lives here. The coral polyps and the zooxanthellae algae creates the calcium carbonate structure. And then the wave action creates this thing that forms up on the top. And then the birds land and they poop on it. And bird poop is technically guano. So they poop on the top of it and they bring seeds and vegetation. And eventually this little island sits up above the water and it becomes a magnificent forest. what's really special is it's actually, it's dynamic, it's growing all the time. So as sea level grows, a coral K will grow with it, as long as it's in healthy condition, as long as the forest can continue to rebuild itself. So Lady Elliot was covered for thousands of years by birds and the vegetation that mixes with the bird poop, the poo, and that made the guano. And because it's very high in compost and organic matter, it's fantastic for farming. So 200 plus years ago, Europeans came to Australia, they started farming. They're here in the land of plenty. But that's another whole story. The agriculture there didn't last long before it needed input. So they went looking for nitrogen and phosphorus and other things to put into their farms. And they found it here. They found guano and they mined it. And they came out with shovels and wheelbarrows and workers. And for 10 years, from the 1860s until the 1870s, they dug it up and they took it away. Of course, they took the trees away. They stripped it bare, the lovely guano and all that vegetation and mulch was on the top, down to the hard coral, and there it sat, unloved and unwanted for almost 100 years. They had to build a lighthouse because once they took the trees and the guano down, the island shrunk to the point at high tide you could hardly not see it. So it was almost a submerged reef. They put a lighthouse on it. That meant lighthouse keepers. So we had this amazing cultural experience in that they built this lighthouse keepers area. And so for 100 years, Lady Elliot sat unloved and uncared for. And the lighthouse keepers put a few little random trees, mostly stuff from old Mother England, that type of thing, you know, the thoughts of what they came here with. And occasionally they would plant the odd thing. And in the 1969, 1970, an enthusiastic young Australian, Don Adams, came out here with his airplane, saw this from the air and said, I'm going to make a difference. And so he got permission to put a short airstrip, landed his airplane, built a tiny resort and started to plant a few trees. And that was the beginning of what we all now work together with. And that was the beginning of this collaboration and partnership that we see. So from what I saw when I first came here in 1980, there was a handful of trees here, very barren, windswept. We called it the Rock. That was its nickname. So there's a windswept rock with a runway and a little A-frame and a few trees, but not much else. But the water was glorious. And it was spectacular and had magnificent big megafauna, manta rays and things. My first place I saw a manta was here. And then that same day I went to Lady Musgrave and I saw a Personia forest. And my inquiring mind, and you know what I'm like, always asking questions. Why is that like that and this one like this? So that led me to inquire over years until I eventually learned how to fly airplanes so I could take people here, because this part of me was, I want to make a difference. And I saw a place that had been, I use the word a bit tough, but I think it's real. It was raped, it was stripped, it was mined. But what's so exciting, we can prove that a place that's had all that terrible treatment can be brought back to now being referred to as pristine. And that's, again, with partnerships and collaboration working. So we saw it in its worst form, and now we're seeing it in a spectacular form. We've had great rains this year. It's beautiful and green. All the vegetation and the program that's been working in collaboration with so many people, the Reef Islands Initiative, the Queensland Government, you know, the supporters behind the scenes, the team here, the volunteers. It's just fantastic. Kathy and her team have got us to where we are now.
Thank you, Peter. And I think what's so powerful is this is 50 years. This is what you can do in 50 years, because you can't help sometimes but think, how can we rebuild when you look out and you see ecosystems that have been destroyed, what you can do. And this, the deck wasn't stacked in its favour. It needed the human intervention, it needed the collaboration, and it needed the science to guide it too. And I think that leads us to Kathy, because you've been, I mean, your relationship with LEI goes back decades. I'd love to hear your story of first coming upon LEI, and then I'd love to talk about how that's evolved into your practice and your research and what you're doing today and guiding us all, because science is knowing and science is truth.
Yes. So I was very fortunate to live for 5 years on Heron Island at the research station there. And while I was living there, I used to regularly take student groups, particularly overseas student groups, over to Lady Elliot Island. And having lived on a coral cay myself, I could immediately, a little bit like what Peter was saying, I was seeing differences. I was seeing quite significant differences between two very close coral cays that are basically in the same Capricorn bunker group. But but some of these differences were, of course, quite obvious, like the fact that, you know, there certainly didn't have anywhere the same sort of tree composition as you would see on Heron Island. But then there was other differences, like marine megafauna. So Lady Elliot Island had regularly, every time, you know, particularly if I was going there in the wintertime, we'd regularly see manta rays, where on Heron that was a much more rare event. And so that started making me think about, well, why are some of these big differences occurring? Not necessarily the forest, because I understood about the history of that, but more about what was happening in the water. Like, why does Lady Elliot seem to attract these amazing large body megafauna relative to some place that's still protected but quite close, but just doesn't attract the same number of or the same diversity of this larger species? And so that's sort of where it all started from. And then soon after living at Heron Island, I moved down to North Stradbroke Island. And when I was down
you've got the best history of where you've lived, lady. I love it. I love it. I want to be you.
But when I was living on North Stradbroke Island, we would see
the island queen.
Yeah, we would see manta rays down there, but we would only see them for a certain time of the year, and then they disappear. So as far as the Project Manta was concerned, my very first question was looking at, well, where are these animals going? And I knew about Lady Elliot. I knew that there was mantas up there. And so the very first question was, is it the same population? Is it two separate populations? Where are they going, you know, in between? And that's really where I started really actively working at Lady Elliot. I had done a little bit of research in the early days where I was looking at blennies, which are little tiny grazing fish on the platform reef there. So I spent my time looking at the small fish as well. But the mantas were really the thing that drew me to Lady Elliot. And then once you're at Lady Elliot, you realize that it's not just the mantas that are making the place unique. So many different species of fish, so many different very large animals that you wouldn't necessarily see around coral reefs. And so that really spurred me on to continue on working in this area. And as I said, having worked on Lady Elliot for a couple of decades, it's an extremely special place. And as far as manta rays are concerned, they're really considered to be sort of the center of the universe, because it is one of the best places. It is the largest aggregation of manta rays anywhere on the east coast of Australia. So it is really a very special location. And associated with that is a very healthy reef as well, particularly relative to other places that have been heavily impacted by coral bleaching. And until just recently, we've never really had any records of coral bleaching on Lady Elliot. It's only in the last couple years that we're starting to see low-level bleaching that has, you know, has recovered relatively quickly, because it's quite resilient still as well. So I feel really privileged to be working in an ecosystem that is truly, while it's, you know, it's not completely pristine, it is one of the best examples of a intact coral reef in this region, which is fantastic.
Thank you. Look, I think we all can feel privileged for you as well, and think it's a pretty lucky post. But I mean, questions are coming in, so I'm trying to juggle all of that. And so to prove to you that people are really listening and wanting more from you, Kathy, there's a question that's come in saying, so what was the answer? Why do so many of the reef's animals called Lady Elliot home? Have we solved that yet, or is it just to see Pete when they go past, or are they theories? Do we know?
Pete's pretty awesome. I can understand why. Pete and I belong to the mutually exclusive. We both admire each other. The mutually exclusive admiration society. But the reason is the reef is actually, there's a couple of different things that makes Lady Elliot Island Reef really unique. One of them is its geographic position. It's really close, relatively close to the edge of the continental shelf. I think it's only about 8 kilometers away. And that once you get off that continental shelf, that's when you get those really deep waters. And you also get upwellings, and upwellings are the things that bring nutrients to the surface. And so as soon as you've got that combination of nutrients and sunlight, you then have you've got plankton and stuff blooming, and that of course then allows the rest of the ecosystem itself to flourish. So that's one thing. It's because it's close to the continental shelf. Secondly, it's actively fed by the waters from the East Australian Current. It's right on the edge of this thing called the Capricorn Eddy. And this Capricorn Eddy is feeding these nutrient-rich waters right across, right by Lady Elliot Island. And of course, when you've got prey going past there, that's when you start to get your big animals following it as well. So that's why we tend to see a lot of big open sea animals that you wouldn't necessarily see other places. Like you see big schools of very large tuna and mackerel, and those sort of what you would normally be considered to be more open ocean species. And we do see those past Lady Elliot Island. The other thing is, of course, it's completely protected. So there's a lack of extractive industries there. And that has been like that for a very long time. And to give you an example of how that's impacted one species in particular, coral trout, for example, if you go to most places, coral trouts are one of those fish that people will target, whether they're recreational or commercial. It's a very high commodity fish. On Lady Elliot Island, I know that the staff there were asked by Eye on the Reef to do surveys every time they went out to do surveys. And one of the species of fish that they asked them to monitor was coral reef fish. And the guys at the dive shot said, "You really want us to count every single coral reef fish that we see?" And he's like, "Yeah," because he's coming from areas where they'd normally see maybe 2 or 3 a dive. So they took him out on a dive. They got to over 200 on a 40-minute dive, and the guy stopped counting. He said, "Yeah, no, we're not going to count every single coral reef fish that you have in this region." But I mean, that's a really good example of a species that's really found a safe space, so to speak. And of course, those coral reef fish, while they're around Lady Elliot Island, will also start to move into other areas as well. So it's really a nursery habitat for this particular species. And then I guess sorry.
No, please go, please. If you've got another one, please share.
And then the last one, I think, is really lack of pests. So whether that be on the island itself, so sea turtles, for example, that are nesting on mainland environments are often having to deal with feral dogs, pigs, foxes, you name it, that either eat the eggs or attack the females themselves. And even in the water, like only until just recently, we've started to see some crown of thorns showing up on Lady Elliot. But that is, again, an extremely recent event, whereas other parts of the Great Barrier Reef have been battling with crown of thorn outbreaks since the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s. So it really has sort of, despite having been strip mined in the early days, the rest of the environment has really sort of avoided some of those bigger pressures that a lot of other coral reefs have come to. So that answers that question. It's
an amazing answer.
Special.
I love it. And I think what's interesting is, if I summarize all of that, it's got all the conditions of a great home.
It's correct.
Safe. It's in a good location. It's a great place to raise your kids. It's all the things that we as humans crave to, that makes a good community, a great suburb. It's just got all those ingredients. And so that's why, and once the animals start to come there, they attract more, and it's so critical that we must protect it. It's a beautiful story. We've got another question. So please go, Peter.
Bit, Anna. And its protectors really care for it and love it and treat it as custodians. And I'm talking about people like Kath and ourselves out here. I think that's really important. That's a great home, is that the elders in the home care for all those within the home and within the community.
I think that's a really good point, because I think it's something we don't talk about a lot. I mean, there's a lot we don't talk about as we grapple with climate change. We don't often focus on the good news stories, the progress, and pat ourselves on the back and go, you know, this is a good story. Good people are doing good things here. We also don't really, we sometimes go to the worst case, and we don't often focus on the good pieces and know that they need continual stewardship. You know, we can't just go, well, that one's fixed, move on to the next one. This is an enduring challenge that we must always be. We can't take our eye off these special places, because we need them to continue to thrive. So it's a really good point. We've got another note that's come in through Facebook, which is that someone has seen a video of an ornate eagle ray spotted at Lady Elliot recently. So they've asked both of you, and I'm going to go to Peter first, because I know that Kathy's got a really cool one. What's the coolest animal you've seen at the island? You've got to talk about the pink, don't you? Don't talk about the pink, man.
Oh, I was going to talk about that one, but that's okay.
Oh, okay, no. You're going to talk about the fresh one that's just recently appeared.
Oh, okay, all right.
Sorry,
well,
I'm
Peter,
not leading the answers. So, Peter, what's the coolest one if you do the one that I want you to say? Sorry.
Well, that video that of that ornate eagle ray I was with Jacinta when she took that. We were out there together one morning, and I'd only ever seen one or two in all my almost 40 years snorkeling on the Barrier Reef. And I said, I think that's a neonate. And sure enough, she got it. It's fantastic. So
wow.
They're hard to beat because they are so rare. But yeah, I thought about that and thought, what is my most unique experience? And I just love all the wildlife out here. I extremely love the opportunity that we're seeing more and more now of the whales. When they come past, they swim over. They're quite inquisitive. And oftentimes they'll swim over to you when you're in the water snorkeling, and they'll basically look at you and they'll almost put their pec fin out, almost as if they're reaching out. And to me, that's an experience that's very hard to put words to. It's quite emotional.
And you saw some this morning, didn't you? Make us all really jealous. You've been swimming with whales this morning.
Yes, I was out there and I saw whales breaching, and I've seen mantas. And the guys in the dive said, we're almost embarrassed. We were down on the bottom. We had to leave in the end. There were so many mantas. So, look, I would find it hard to put my finger on one. Kath's probably got a couple of beauties because Kath spends more time underwater than I do. She's the underwater mermaid.
All right, take it away, Kath. You can do both then, because he hasn't mentioned the big one. So go for it. Tell us your coolest animal moments.
So I'll mention two. So well, how about I go one, the coolest underwater and the coolest above land.
Perfect. Do that. I love it.
So the coolest underwater one is probably a manta ray that we identified, and his name is Inspector Clouseau. And as you may know, nice. Inspector Clouseau is from the Pink Panther, and the reason he's called that is because he is bright fuchsia pink on his belly. So he's not an albino because he still has a black back, he has black eyes and black markings, but his belly, when I'm talking fuchsia, I'm talking this color pink, you know, the same color.
Like serious pink. Yeah.
Serious pink. And as far as we're aware, he's the only one in the world. And he's only been seen at Lady Elliot Island and nowhere else. And he regularly shows up in September and October. That's when we have a tendency to see him show up. So he's quite regular when he does.
So basically the next couple of months, it's his time.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to be, the team and I are going to be back in October. So we'll be keeping an eye out for him to see if we
Please share that footage. We'd love to share that with the world. It's time for the inspector to to go viral. Let's make it a 2020 highlight.
Yeah, so actually he's quite famous. He was highlighted in both Australia Geographic and National Geographic not too long ago. So he's very famous. So he's pretty cool, and we're still trying to figure out why he's the color he is. But that's a line of inquiry we've been going on with. The second coolest one, and this is a really recent story. So we've just come back from one of our research projects, which is, as you talked about before, is Leaf to Reef, which is looking at the connectivity of the birds and the trees and the groundwater out to the actual ocean itself, and how is that affecting the plants and the animals that are living around the reef. And one of the species of birds that we've been doing a lot of work on is the red-tailed tropic bird. And the red-tailed tropic birds are the beautiful, glorious, they're just so attractive, and you don't see them very rare. You don't see them in very many places, and there's only two places in the Great Barrier Reef where they currently roost. That's up on Rain Island, which of course the public do not have access to, and Lady Elliot Island. And they have nests straight out the front of where the resort guests are. And they are, and this little colony is really quite important because red-tailed tropic birds are listed as vulnerable to extinction on the IUC Red List. We know so little about them because they spend most of their time out on the wing, out in the open ocean feeding, and they very rarely, except to breed, come back to land. And you can really see that when you watch the animals land. Their hips are designed so that the legs can lie back while they're flying, so it makes them really streamlined. But of course, because their hips are rotated backwards, when they hit the ground and try to walk, it forces their face forward. So there's these really
not a good landing.
No. And when they walk, they sort of continuously sort of fall on their face and pull themselves up and fall on their face a little bit.
But that's so hard because they're like elegant. I mean, when you look at the photos of them, they look like male ballet dancers. To them, be so clumsy on the land. It's comical.
Yeah, it seems completely opposite as to what you would expect them to be. But of course, in the sky,
they're magnificent.
They are the ballet dancers. They're extremely graceful, and the pairs, they've got these long, they're called red-tailed tropic birds because they have these two long filamentous red banner feathers that stick out the back. And they actually use those to dance in the sky. So when they're mating, they do these very complicated flights where basically it shows off their banners, and both the males and the females have them. So it's really quite unique. But getting on with the story, the reason why this is really exciting is that we've recently started a banding program for these birds again, because as I said, it's a really special colony for the Great Barrier Reef. There had been some banding done in the late 90s, but then the program just kind of stopped. And so we've started this up again. And while we were there, we were very fortunate to have 5 nests that were that all had either eggs or chicks on it. And I do know Peter just informed me that one of the nests that had eggs while we were there has just got a brand new chick. Cool. And they've named the chick Bruce.
Yeah. It's a crazy year. Crazy things are happening this year.
So Bruce, the fluffy chick, has just hatched, but he's a new playmate to another chick that was there when we were there, called Marshmallow. And Marshmallow, Marshmallow is quite a bit bigger. And what happens with the little chicks is that one parent will stay with them all the time when they're in this very young stage. One will go out and feed. The one that's with the chick will do these little short forays and come back and feed the chick. Meanwhile, the other individual is doing much bigger flights where they're basically feeding themselves. Right. And then after a couple of days, they'll swap over. So both of them will stay with the chick for a little while, and the one that's been sitting there basically kind of starving and just feeding the chick will take off and head off to go feed themselves.
Oh, that's so clever, isn't it? They've really got the work-life balance.
Oh, they definitely have the work-life balance sorted out, and co-parenting, very much.
Oh, very nice.
Very good.
But it turned out that when we were banding Marshmallow's parents, because of course we couldn't get them both at the same time, they were coming in and coming out. It turned out that one of the parents had already been banned. It already had a band on its leg. Oh, wow. And so we went and looked it up, and we found out that it had been banded by Marine Parks back in 1997. And it was banned as a chick at the very same nest that it itself has now raising a new chick. And two things are really special about that, because first of all, it shows that the animals are very site attached, like they come back to the same places that they themselves have been raised. So that's really important. So that means that little colony is really important, because those animals will constantly come back there, is assuming that nothing untoward goes with them. The second thing that's really important about this is that because we know exactly when that animal was hatched, we now know, or we now think, that this particular individual is the oldest known reproductive individual of that species. It's 23 years old, and that's the oldest record for any individual to be still reproducing for this particular species. So that's really special, because that means that this region that this animal has grown up in is providing all of the nutrients, all of the things that it needs to be able to grow and live a really long life, and not just live a long life, but also be able to reproduce, because that takes a lot of energy, and you need to have a really good environment for that to be able to happen. So that's the other really exciting thing that's been happening. And we're expanding. Next time we go back in October, we're going to start putting some little tiny satellite tags on the red-tailed tropic birds to actually see where they're going out into the Capricorn Eddy and things like that, and look at some of that connectivity. Where are these animals going? Because a bit like when I started started Project Manta, I know they're here, and I know they're over there, but I don't know what they're doing in between. And so we're trying to understand a little bit of that as well.
That's so cool. And I love how it's such practical science. It's, people can dismiss science as collecting data and locking it up in a publication, which is critical too. But this idea that this is informing practice in the real time, and it's allowing us to pivot plans and learn and understand and continue this pursuit of the more we know, the more we can protect, the more we can be wise, the more we can be smart. That's a really cool story.
And I'll just add, from a practical sense, I've been working very closely with Peter's team, who have been doing the revegetation. And what we did with the red-tailed tropic birds is we looked at all the nests that had been used historically, because we know exactly where all of them were. We've got them all GPS marked. And we looked at those that are still being used versus those that had been abandoned. And we looked at things like the amount of vegetation, the kind of vegetation. And with that, we've been able to chat to Jim, who's in charge of the revegetation program, and he's putting in, and it was great because it was all happening when I went there came back. There's all these new octopus bushes that have all been replanted. So they're actually taking the information that we're gathering, and it's being turned into very practical outcomes where what we're doing is we're hopefully restoring this site so that we can start to attract more of these individuals back and hopefully grow the colony a bit more as well.
That'll be an amazing thing to track. And you think, in 27 years, if marshmallow comes back, will there be this flourishing colony? And, I guess a success would look like it's gone down to the endangered list. I mean, you could actually see that happening. That's not an impossible dream. That's very cool. That's very cool. So Peter, there's another question that's come in, which I know is close to your heart. And I'm actually thrilled that someone's asked this because you can answer this one very well, which is that if climate change is such a big threat to the island and to the Great Barrier Reef, then what are you doing to reduce your emissions? And I just went, take it away, because this is the story. If everybody can sit at home and think, it's a global problem, what could I do? You got to hear this story, because this is what you can do, and this is inspiring. Take it away.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing that everybody sees that we do is that when we started out here, we had diesel generators. We're so far from the coast. As Kath explained, the geographics of this place are fantastic, but it's a long way from the coast. So we have to do everything here ourselves. So we had to make our own power. We have to make our own water. We have to treat our own wastewater. We have to treat all our own waste and our rubbish. So Lady Elliot for many years ran with big diesel generators, as does many other islands. And so diesel generators are things that burn fossil fuels, diesel obviously, and a bit similar on the mainland, but the more efficient way that they've done it over the years than diesel generators is coal-fired power stations. So our coal-fired power station was a big diesel generator that burnt over 500 litres of diesel every single day. It was noisy, it was smelly, it stored diesel, it was expensive, but most importantly, as we learned 15 odd years ago, for me, that's when I started to understand this, was putting out an emission, a greenhouse gas that was bad for the environment. And as that became more and more apparent to us, we made the decision that we were going to go to a better way of doing it. We're going to go to renewable power. And so many people told us, you can't do that, it won't happen, it's too hard, it's too expensive, all the negative things. And you know what I'm like, the more you say I can't do something, the more I'm going to make it happen for a host of reasons. And one of them was financially, because 500 litres of diesel a day at $1.50 a litre was an awful lot of money for a place that might have only had 10 or 20 guests in house. That was financially unsustainable, and we learned it was also environmentally unsustainable. So long story short, in 2008, we built a hybrid solar power station. We went down to smaller generators, started with solar panels and batteries, and away we went. And we went from our 550 litres of diesel a day down to 300. And every year we saved some money. And so the money that we saved, we reinvested back into it. We bought some more solar panels, some more batteries, and we saved a bit more. And each year thereafter, we've continued to do that to the point where it's remarkable. We're now burning basically no diesel. We have no smell. We only store a small amount, really just for emergencies. And so many people have seen what we've done. We make all our power for free from the sun. It's quite remarkable. Now, yeah, I won't hide from the fact that the downside is, of course, our batteries that we use at night will only last so long. Our panels will last only so long, but it's a way, way, way better than what we were doing in the past. So we now use that renewable energy to make all of our desalinated water, because out here we can't take the water off the roof with all these beautiful birds pooping on the roof, putting guano up there for us. And we certainly don't want to pull it out of the island because, as Kath said, the connectivity with what the water does, it comes through and down into the ground and then out into the reef. So we don't want to touch that. So we actually desalinate all of our water, about 30,000 litres a day. And you know what's exciting? We make our water for free from the sun. And I just get such a kick out of that. And then it just goes on. We then treat our wastewater, treat it to an A-class standard. Then we just irrigate it out onto the airstrip where it needs it for the dust. And it goes on from there. There are so many things. Someone asks me often, yeah, but you use airplanes. I go, yeah, we do use airplanes and they do burn fossil fuel. We use the best, most fuel efficient airplanes we can to get the best fuel burn per passenger seat mile. But I'm very proud to say that we've also been supporting a project that started on the Gold Coast, building electric engines to go in the very airplanes that we fly, the Cessna Caravans. I'm even more excited to say that we flew the first Cessna Caravan with an electric engine over on Moses Lake in Washington State in USA only a couple of months ago, and it's now going through its trials. Now, it's a project. It's going to take a few years before I'm flying one, but I give you my word, I'll be flying one here to Lady Elliot using renewable energy and electric power before I'm too old to do it, I promise. And I've got 20 years to go, I reckon. But seriously, we think we'll be flying electric airplanes here within 6 or 7 years. And so what can we do? We can all do something. I had a platform here at Lady Elliot that it speaks to a lot of people and brings people in and we can show them. But you at home, there's so many things like that you can do. Minimise your footprint. Minimise in so many ways.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, it's inspiring to hear you talk, and the fact that it's practical too is something that should inspire everybody. Unfortunately, we could do this all day, but I have to wrap it up. But I really am so grateful for what you've both done. You are just, as an Australian, you're just really awesome Australians. And even you, Kathy, with your accent, I'm going to claim you as an Australian.
I am. I'm a citizen. I've been here since '90s. So.
Well, good, because you're making this country stronger and better. And in this environment that we're in this year, where we still don't know what's behind every corner, it's so important because people are slowing down and they're stopping a little bit and looking at the fragility of their relationship with the planet, and they're making new decisions. And they're also recognizing that we can do more together as a community. And we hope that as a result of that, the reef, that, you know, her issues and her challenges haven't gone away during COVID. You know, isolation is not going to solve the climate crisis that this country and this world is facing. And so it's so important that we continue to tell this story while people have got a bit more time to consider what they do. I want to thank you both for what you do and the work that you're doing. And we're just at the foundation just so privileged amongst all the projects that we do to ride shotgun with you both and to witness the great stuff you do. So Eco Champion, Peter, you're awesome. Go forth, be awesome. Go out in the water and swim with some more amazing animals. And Kathy, just please keep doing what you're doing and leading us through this great journey. I also want to just thank you to the partners who are funding the Reef Islands initiative. We would not be able to do this remarkable work. We would not have this story. We would not have this enduring legacy for our kids without your support. And that's Lend-Lease, the Australian Government's Reef Trust, the Queensland Government and the Fitzgerald Family Foundation. You are awesome people because you invested in something that was just a bit of a dream, and look at what we're doing. So thank you everybody for joining us, and thanks for your great questions. Keep an eye out on our socials to find out more about the ReefChat, and we'll share a photo of Marshmallow and Bruce because you got to see these birds to believe them. They're awesome. But in the meantime, you can visit our website, barrierreef.org, where you can find out more about our reef, the amazing marine life that depends on it, and the more than 60 projects that are saving our reef right now, underway, led by Australians, and awesome. Until next time, stay safe. Thanks so much for your support and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks you, Peter.
Thanks, Anna.
See ya.
Thank you too, Kath. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath.
Take care.